Okay, so I'm going to interview Sean. So I don't know how is the most comfortable for you. Do you want to stand? Cartwheels? Oh, yes, I'm sure. So I'm going to start with a little. So I've known Sean. I met Sean about 20 years ago, roughly, but I'd heard about Sean for a lot longer than that because Sean and my brother are friends. And I always heard wild and crazy stories about Sean through high school, early college. Oh, there we go. And so when Sean went into the mission field, my brother called one day and was like, hey, can we stay at your house overnight? Because I got to take Sean to the airport. And so I was kind of like, sure, no problem. And so that was the first time I ever met you. And I remember thinking, this guy is not at all what I think a missionary or what I thought a missionary was like. Because all the missionaries I'd ever met were older, a little more prim and proper, a little more follow the rules. And here's Sean that's just like, oh, let me tell you about this time we had this party and we went here and we did this. I mean, I've heard about some of the crazy things. I'm amazed you're still alive, honestly. And so I thought it was really cool. But in that time, I lived in Olympia. He was going on the mission field. And so then when we moved to Squim and I started working at the church almost 12 years ago, Olympic View has supported Sean from the time you started in the mission field. And so it was one of those of like, oh, our paths will cross when he's coming to town, or, we'll hear updates. I never thought our lives would intersect again in doing community and church together. And I've had the joy and pleasure of serving with Sean in a lot of roles. And we did a Bible study with Lewis for about a year, and it was probably one of my most favorite years. And it was a hard study, and I didn't like half the stuff I was learning. But I feel honored that I get to do life with you and Kate and your kids, and it's a joy to me. So that's one of my biggest things that you never know where your paths cross at one point when they will cross again with somebody. So I got to get my notes out so I can ask you your questions. So if you could give us a quick introduction about you and who you are.
All right. Not many people know this, but I was born in Forks. And but I started growing up in Eastern Washington, so I never really saw Forks. Then we moved to Squim, and Squim is pretty much where my memories start. So yeah, born and raised in Squim, underneath Mount Baldy. And my dad has been a school teacher forever, and I was homeschooled. And I love the outdoors. That was my playground, just running around the Dungeness and running around the woods and everything.
So can you tell us how you met Kate?
So I was on the edge of this volcano when the lightning struck, and that is a joke that I like to tell because it bothers her. Because I like to make up stories, so just had to get that in there to see her eyes roll. No, yeah, but was I worse off than I am now, or about the same? I was deathly sick. She met me because some Australians were taking me to a hospital in Thailand. I've spent a lot of time in hospitals. I had dengue fever, which I don't recommend. And apparently you have something called blood platelets. And I was supposed to go see how many I had. But I couldn't get myself to the hospital. So this Christian Australian family was taking me. And Kait was with the same missions organization, Pioneers, and had come to help out their team. And they were delivering some flood relief supplies. So they were kind of multitasking while they're shipping some supplies. They dropped by and picked me up, took me to the hospital. And yeah, I was pretty out of it, but I wasn't blind. As I was hobbling into the truck, I was like, who is that? Hello. But I was bummed I was too sick to hit on her. Thankfully, God gave me some second chances.
Well, I just have to say, anytime you see pictures of them when they were dating, the grin on Sean's face is like bigger than his face. I mean, it's like you can't hardly contain it. So I always think it's really cute when those pop up on Facebook. So as you mentioned, you've been on the mission field. And so my next question is like, of your jobs, what would you say your favorite job ever was? You've ever had?
Well, if missions is a job, but if you're talking about normal jobs, it was working for Asplund, those giant orange trucks that work on trimming trees away from the power lines along the roads. They just only do power lines along roads. Apparently, it's like a death wish or something. They want to work with high voltage electricity, falling trees, and traffic. And a giant chipping machine that can turn a log into little bits. And chainsaws and stuff. So that was my favorite job. It was awesome. Like every day you go to work, it's like, I might die today.
Like I said, wild and crazy. I'm surprised you're still alive. So how would you say your life is different now than it was when you were 20, 25? I know that's a loaded question because,
It's a little bit slower.
I don't know, you have 2 kids, so.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I mean, they've maintained the momentum. I'm a lot more of a homebody. I'm extroverted, as you can tell. I'm here today. So like I would never spend time, by myself or just sitting at home. Like I was always, out doing something with people. Now the people that I spend the most time with just happen to be at home. So I spend a lot more time at home, which I love, and it's because I want to. I would say I'm a lot more content. Like I was pretty antsy. I need to be on the move. I need to be doing something. I need to be pushing the limits. My poor grandfather, he called me out one time for always pushing the limits. But yeah, I feel like I push the limits a lot less. I don't know if people can tell, but
Maybe not so life-threatening limits, I guess. Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about distilling our faith. As someone who grew up in the church, a younger man, and a husband and a father, what are some things that you personally have wrestled with, if you feel like sharing?
yeah, God has really used my wonderful wife to show me how human and flawed I am. I was pretty perfect when I was single. But it's not just like her, it's God doing it. It's God showing me I'm really prideful. I like to feel sorry for myself. I feel entitled. And I haven't shaken that. That's still with me. Yeah, I'm full of myself. That's not the best case scenario. It's better to be full of Jesus. And I thought by this time I'd be there because God's been working on me so long. But stubbornness is a double-edged sword where it's good sometimes and bad sometimes. And yeah, I think some bad stubbornness has worked against me continually putting everything on the cross. Because when I said, okay, God, you want other people to hear about you in places where they don't even have a written Bible, I'm willing to be a martyr. I'm willing to die for you. Like send me across the world to the jungle or whatever. And like, let's tell people about you. And, I'll probably die, but okay, it's worth it. Like there's been points where I've put everything on the cross, maybe not all of my pride, because I'm like, yeah, look at me. I'm going to go do something big for Jesus. But thinking about my life now, I think there's some control that I pretend I have, that I've got things that I'm not sacrificing, that I'm not putting on the cross, that I'm not letting God have, that I'm not letting him kill. My comfort doing things my way possessions, plans. Yeah, again, pride and entitlement and feeling sorry for myself and yeah, selfishness and stuff. It's like, I thought I'd be over that. I really thought I would, because this isn't new stuff that God's been working on me, but it's good for me to contemplate and realize, not to be down on myself and like dejected, like, oh man, but to just be like, okay, God, yeah, sure, here you go. And at least in this moment, I can give it to him. I know my sin nature. I'm gonna try and be in charge again, but if I just take it moment by moment and keep surrendering, God, you know way better than I do. Let's do things your way. Can you please stop me from ruining your plans and help me to listen to you and go along with what you're doing? God, will you please give me your perspective? Will you please give me your values? If I can just do that every moment that God makes me think of it, those moments will stack up, and I'll see some improvement, because I think that's what's happened in the past. I just need to not lose that.
If it makes you feel any better, those of you that remember LaRue, she was a woman in our church that lived to be 107. And when she was probably 102, we were doing something and she was talking about like, well, I'm still here on earth because God's still got things to teach me. And so I remember at the time being like, I'm never going to get it figured out. So that was like the wake up call for me to be like, okay, God's always going to work on you. So, you got lots of time. Oh, any stuff. Oh, the next one was, what are some things that we can be praying for you specifically?
I got a quote here from Elizabeth Elliot. Elizabeth Elliot said, "He makes us wait. He keeps us on purpose in the dark. He makes us walk when we want to run, sit still when we want to walk, for he has things to do in our souls that we are not interested in." It kind of makes me cry, because it's hard for me, and this is something I really don't like about myself. It's hard for me to just sit with God and just be quiet. And it's hard for me to admit that, because I feel like that's so rude and insulting to God. He doesn't deserve that. Being my best friend, being my creator, my sustainer, my savior, my redeemer, going through all the wild adventures with me and everything, like, God deserves some face-to-face, like, attention and adoration and like respect, and me enjoying time with him, right? If he's my best friend, am I really just going to be distracted all the time? Apparently, because I'm distracted a lot. Yeah, so that quote from Elizabeth Elliot is good for me, because God wants me to slow down and stop and talk to him, and more importantly, listen to him and think about him, consider him, ponder him, and spend some time with him and enjoy it. So that's what you can pray for me, is that scary silence and stillness, where I'm not busy doing stuff. It's just like, for some reason it's difficult, but it's good. And I think that's what God is trying to tell me, Sean, you need more of this quiet stillness with me. What was the other part of that? Oh, he makes us wait. God has been doing a whole lot of what he thinks I need and not what I want. And I don't like that. God, no, this is what I want. I don't need this. Like, I don't need my stomach cut open right now to remove my appendix. Like, really? That's not what I need. This is stupid. Like, I'm not on board with this. God in his wisdom, It's just like, you know what, Sean, just thank me that I'm taking care of you and that I know what I'm doing. Oh, okay. So I guess, speaking to myself, but maybe you guys can benefit from this too. Trust God when things are bad, when things stink, when they're hard, when they're frustrating, when they don't make sense. Um, he does know best, even though, it might be relationally painful, emotionally painful, physically painful, mentally painful, like going through the worst time of your life, like when Boaz, we didn't know if he was going to live when he was in Seattle Children's Hospital. That just ripped my heart out of my chest. It was terrible. I didn't like that at all. Um, and it could have gone multiple different ways. Thank God he decided things were going to go the way they have. And I'm so happy and so grateful. And, we all love Boaz and he's perfect the way he is. That's not how I felt about it when the whole thing started, but, God knows what he's doing. So telling myself and you guys, trust him. He knows what he's doing.
Thank you, Sean.
Okay, yes, so things changed and now you got me up here, so. All right, pull up my notes here. So, I picked First Peter 5:1-5, because Lewis asked if I guess we could wrap up the Distilling Your Faith series. And I've really appreciated this series personally. It's kind of where I've been the last couple of years since coming off the mission field. The deconstruction as well as reconstruction has been a really big factor in my life. And so I've really enjoyed getting to walk through this sermon with everyone. I'm just gonna, because there was a little bit of a gap between the Bible reading and the interview, I'm just gonna read the verses again. I really liked the message, but I have the NLT pulled up, so I'm just going to read that. But I liked the message one better. And now a word to you who are elders in the churches. I too am an elder and a witness to the sufferings of Christ. And I too will share in his glory when he is revealed to the whole world. As a fellow elder, I appeal to you. Care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly, not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. Don't lord it over the people assigned to your care, but lead them by your own good example. And when the great shepherd appears, you will receive a crown of never-ending glory and honor. In the same way, you who are younger must accept the authority of the elders, and all of you dress yourselves in humility as you relate to one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And I picked that one because I thought that kind of is, as much as you can, summed up the last few weeks of how we're supposed to be as a body. I kind of look at the elders as mature Christians, just people who have been in walking with the Lord for a while. So that's kind of how I take those verses. So I believe that could be most, if not all of us in this room that are on the journey with Jesus. It doesn't have to be your official title in your church congregation that you attend. And so I think that this is really pivotal for what we've been talking about the last few weeks, and just how to move forward as far as from these sermon series, what we're going to learn and take with us. That we are, let's see, am an elder and a witness to the sufferings of Christ. I too will share in his glory when he is revealed to the whole world. that we're supposed to care for the flock. And I believe that that means our community, the people that God has put in our lives, Christian and otherwise, and that we're supposed to do it willingly and not grudgingly, which can be really hard because I know a lot of times for me, there's a certain way that I would be willing to care for others that would either be easy or convenient for me. And usually God asks or put things in front of me that are inconvenient or not how I would necessarily want to care for others. I'd rather make a meal for someone than, sit in this hard thing with them or, something like that. And so, yeah, that's kind of what spoke out to me was just that there's going to be surprises maybe and how it's not ever going to be smooth sailing and how we work together, and that that's how we're supposed to do it, willingly, not grudgingly. And yeah, we don't lord over people assigned to our care. I think the same thing in any kind of I know a lot of you guys are in leadership roles in your work, and so I think a lot of those kind of leadership things end up being effective in church as well as here. So just those kind of leadership examples, if you are like overly bossy or like extra like kind of wielding your power just to wield it, then people don't want to follow you, as well as if you're humble. And so that's kind of what I got out of those verses. I'm sure we could talk about that forever. Lewis also asked if us to kind of share some of the difficulties of coming off the field and fitting back in the American church. So I was going to just share that a little bit. And then how I mainly want to spend our time, though, is I feel like one of the biggest things that we've been learning these past few weeks is that we are a community, we are a body, we're supposed to be working together. It's not supposed to be the person on the stage. And so I think that we should have a time of like Q&A or discussion about how this sermon series has impacted you specifically, and where you think us as a community and congregation should be possibly even be using these things in our church and in our day-to-day lives. So I'm telling you ahead of time so you can be thinking about it a little bit. I found this really cool podcast a while back called Unlearning Youth Group, and they take different hot button topics and they talk about like the bad, maybe certain sort of like what Lewis has been talking about deconstruction, like going through, well, maybe that wasn't a good idea because this resulted in this for these reasons. And that's a lot of times where some people kind of leave deconstruction like, oh, this was not good, we need to toss that, like that was bad. But something else that they add to it is look at the intentions of what was being done, because I don't believe that the different things that we've been going over in the sermon series were ever done out of like malice or, like even with absolute, kind of marginalizing certain minorities or making certain people feel unwelcome or things like that. I don't think anyone ever did that on purpose. And so talking about like the good intentions behind certain practices. And then at the end, their question is always, where do we go from here? And so that was kind of what I thought we could focus on today. Lewis has given us some really good things to think about and some really good nuggets, but I don't want us just to be like, yeah, that's good, that's really good, and just kind of move on. So I just want us to start thinking about how we can actually use what we've been learning and where we can go from here. But yeah, first I'll just share a little bit of the last couple of years. As most of you guys know, Sean and I worked in Myanmar together for the last for about 5 years, and Posey was even born over in Asia. And then we got pregnant, and it just happened that we were going to be here during a furlough while Boaz was being born. And that was totally in God's wisdom because he was born with complications, and that led to us staying here. And so there's definitely been a faith journey with all of that, just God kind of carrying us through in a lot of different ways. Not in the way I would have thought, because I was saved from an early age. So God and I have been through a lot together. So I never doubted his goodness and caring for Boaz and caring for us, even though it felt a little up and down. But there was definitely things that he's been teaching me. And of course, as he's God, he did it in the ways that I didn't even think I needed changing, or the ways that I was more surprised about. The biggest one probably for me is relationship with Jesus over Christian religion. Having grown up in the church, being the oldest daughter, being, growing up in a very Southern conservative church, I would say I ended up with a lot of legalism in my heart and my life, just because I wanted to so badly follow God and follow the right things and follow what he was teaching. And so accidentally, I let a lot of legalism into my heart and kind of the way that I, in my relationship with God. I still had a relationship with Jesus, but it was very much governed by, like, I felt the need to have a quiet time every day. And if I didn't, then I would feel really guilty. And after a while, I realized, but this quiet time isn't actually accomplishing anything, because I'm distracted and I'm just reading because it's supposed to be, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So for a while, I stopped having a quiet time, and that was like a really big deal for me. I'm like, am I gonna go to hell? I don't know. And so it was a big deal, kind of not to like read the Bible every day, because that's what you do. But God was actually calling me to do it differently, because he wanted me to realize it wasn't about rules. It was really about relationship with him. And so the more that I get away in my own life and practice from the like necessarily rules and the like rhythms of certain things, I actually have become closer with Jesus. And that's just my own personal journey, I think, because of how I grew up in the church. But I think that's just kind of the ultimate thing, is that we just have to be so careful, that fine line of following Jesus and not the Christian religion. There's a lot of good things in the Christian religion and our denominations and the different practices we do, like how we take the supper and the candles and everything. But I think, at least for me and other people who maybe struggle with this type of thing, it's just important not to forget the why we're doing it, and just doing it because we're supposed to be doing it. So that's probably been the biggest thing for me. And yeah, just through that, also with the missionary title was always really hard for me overseas, because I felt the need to, it's always really hard for me to take any type of like rest day or anything, even though no one else really pressured me this way. It just felt like people are paying me to like do this certain thing, share the gospel. So if I'm not like, do you know about Jesus? Then like, am I like a fraud? Like, so it was really, felt like a lot of pressure for me overseas. And there's been actually a lot more freedom without that title, just to be in community with people and to really listen to the Holy Spirit and what he wants us to do. And that it doesn't necessarily have to look like evangelism. It can look like giving a ride to a homeless person, or watching someone's kids, or like listening to someone who's had a hard day, or so many things. Our church, they feel like this community is really good with that, and I've learned a lot from you guys in that area. But yeah, I said that being a missionary without the title is just as important, if not more so. And just like with the legalism as well, the whole love over judgment, especially with like a lot of minorities, and just realizing in my own heart things I didn't want to admit, that I actually had like racism and prejudice in my heart accidentally from just certain things, and that how I've allowed God to open my heart and really listen to that in the last couple of years has been really good. And then finally, women's role in church, even right before we went off the mission field, probably so like 4 years ago, if you had told me that I would be standing up here not speaking but preaching, I would have been like, no, I'm a woman, I'm not allowed to do that. Because that's how I grew up. Like, if women were up, they were speaking, they were not preaching. Because some of those verses we take out of context in Paul. And so just kind of learning about God's true love of women and his desire to have them even be like prominent in the church has really like I don't really love being up here, but like even with Sean preparing his sermon, I was kind of feeling like I think God has something he wants me to say. And then apparently that's why he got his appendix taken out, because I'm supposed to be up here. So just with that, realizing that it's not about what the rules that like the church religion has set for us. It's about what God calls you to do. And then you'll be really surprised. I never would have thought it would be an elder in the church. That first off was not allowed in the Southern Baptist church I grew up. Women were not allowed to be any sort of title like that. So being an elder preaching up here, like that's just been a whole journey. And it's just, I'm thankful that you guys have allowed me to go along with that. So that's kind of the last few years for me. And yeah, I think now we should start talking about anything that, I mean, I would love to hear from you guys as far as just what you feel like God has taught you in these last few weeks with Lewis preaching up here and the interviews that have been shared, you know, the good, the bad, and where we go from here. So I'm gonna leave it to you guys now. Yeah.
It's okay to question God.
Here, let me go ahead and put where. So we can have your own. Okay. Is that good? Okay, say it one more time. Okay to question God. It's okay to question God. He's big enough for us to question him. He can handle it. Okay. What else we got?
Well, for me, just you said earlier in interviews recently, very close to young women in the church that re-looking at obviously those that know I am located in Kait, so I just that same stuff Baptist church, and so and was in leadership. So where I'm leading this is just re-looking at verses that about women's role in the church that will break my heart. Like, and I've just been very encouraged by, as I said, those and the strong leaders, the women leaders in our church last year.
So just repeating from Zoom, Rich Johnson said, listening to different interviews from women in the church the past couple of weeks has allowed him to re-examine some verses that maybe he's been taught and just really appreciate women leadership in the church. So I would maybe sum that up as listening to others' perspective, maybe. Okay.
I think we need to be aware, about the people around us, that a lot of people don't go to church because they've been hurt by it. And Christians don't always in our society have test reputation, and there's some bad associations. A really good friend of mine, she's not an atheist because of who Christ is. She's an atheist because of who Christians are. And she grew up going to church. So just be more sensitive. Sometimes witnessing a lot of words and not a lot of action. That's not going to fly.
You need to get up here and preach. Thank you, Heather. So Heather was sharing about, let's see if I can sum it up. That was a lot of good stuff. I'm trying to think through it all. But yeah, Heather was saying that a lot of people have been hurt by the church and are not Christians, not because of Christ, but because of how Christians act, not what they say, but because their actions often don't show enough love. So just thinking through all that.
That's a big one for us. Like, if people can't see God in the things that I do on my day-to-day life, then I'm doing something.
And I think laying that pride down and having the humility that like First Peter was talking about, and being okay to admit that us as a church have messed that up, and even us, individually, like that was really hard for me to like. I've never considered myself a racist or prejudiced against, different minorities, like with homosexuality or whatever, and then realizing that, yeah, I did have quite a bit of prejudice, quite a bit of racism just in the way that I was raised and taught, and that there's a lot of humility that needs to happen. And we're never going to be able to change and be able to start massaging that hurt unless we're able to admit that we as a church and even we as individuals have messed up, and that we want to learn and grow. The first time that I heard it, it really stung. And I think Lewis mentioned it one of the weeks, that a very common saying right now in non-Christian groups is that there's no hate like Christian love. And that was really hard for me to hear, but then realizing that that is some people's experience. They feel like Christians' love actually ends up turning towards hate toward them, really hit me hard. And so just even sitting with that and like praying forgiveness for the church for the times that we've purposely or accidentally hurt other people. Yes, Marilyn.
No single denomination, belief system has it all right.
Amen. No single denomination or belief system has it all figured out or right, Marilyn said. And yes. And that's, I think, again, important with that humility to recognize that even though we feel like, we hold a belief because we feel like that's how we're understanding the world or our perspective, but still having that caveat of, this is how I think God is saying, this is how I think I'm supposed to approach the world. But to have that humility to be like, I could be wrong. I could be approaching this totally wrong. And I think with all the division, that you've been mentioning in the past weeks in your prayer requests, Marilyn, with all the division that's been happening in the United States the past few years with all of our different opinions, I think that's the first real step in trying to come back from that, to admit that like, this is how I see the world, and maybe this is why, but I could also have it totally wrong. And having that humility, I think, is so key and able to bridging that gap of differing opinions.
I have something to say about this deconstruction series, where we've been learning to look into our faith and make sure that we're not just believing traditions or fairy tales or wishful thinking. It's a lot easier to get somebody to believe a lie and they want to believe than to get a person to believe the truth. And when we come out with, I know the truth is this, most people don't really like that.
Mm-hmm.
The word says to always be ready to answer someone that says, why do you have hope in you? And so the way I believe to lead with evangelism is by listening. If I'm not listening to the lost, then I'm not going to hear that question. So
So even if I'm ready to answer, if I'm not interacting and listening to lots of people, I might have the answer, but if I don't hear the question. I'll pause.
So for Zoom, Lowell was basically saying we need to listen to the lost. Evangelism starts with listening. We're not going to know how to answer someone's questions or how to help bring them closer to Jesus if we don't know what they're needing. So if we listen first before we speak, it'd be very important. Thank you for sharing that, Lowell.
What's been striking me lately and over the past few years is we tend to, I'm going to make up the word, over complexify our faith. I think it has to be simple. That's why I really, this series about it appeals, because I mean, denominations and disagreements, typically come when we start overthinking, start writing down, we want a lot of things that, next thing you know, you've got 1,000 rules for one principle, instead of your neighbor. So, to me, it's been very important to remember that Jesus had a message that he could communicate to a woman in the well, and she got it.
So good. Stop overcomplicating things and simplify. And I think that's a lot of what deconstruction kind of is. It's why are we doing these things? Let's go back to the absolute basics of what Jesus taught. So yeah, absolutely. Simplify. And then again, realizing that the things that we do practice, most of them, not all are bad, but at the same time, realizing that simplifying makes it so much easier for others to understand. And then, you know, you can pick and choose your own things that you want to use into your worship.
Last week, Lewis talked about obeying means for all of us determining how to carry that out. And that's the thing we gotta be conscious about. The way I carry out obeying the speed limit might be 5 over. And somebody else that might be, you don't go over. And in our faith and in our walk with God, we gotta be careful. Other people use that scripture sometimes because they just came on a fast, or they had a new experience with the fasting, where God talked to them directly from some experiences they had. And I kind of do that in the secular world. I gotta think about the fact that those people out there are angry, or crowding me, or whatever they're doing. I don't know what their day is like. But I also don't know what someone else's faith is.
That's such a good analogy. Audrey was likening our relationship with Jesus to possibly how we would carry out a certain law, such as speeding. Maybe you're interpreting it as you're comfortable with going 5 over. Someone else might be comfortable going 10 over. Someone's right at that, you know, speed limit mark. Someone else might be comfortable going 3 or 5 under. And they're not all necessarily wrong. It's how that you feel comfortable with that and how you're living that out. So she was saying relationship with Jesus can look different, and we have to make allowances for that. I think these are all very good points, and I really appreciate you guys sharing what you've learned. And I just thought that that was so important that we all unpack that today instead of just me sharing, because I felt like that was such a big part of what Lewis, and then I know for me, how Nina was sharing about the overseas church in the Middle East, how they were so big about not a stage, that it's like a group of people coming together. And this community is one of the best ones I've seen as far as like an American church that allows people to speak during the service, and that, you know, other people, it doesn't just have to be the person upstage with the microphone that is sharing, because we've all been called to share in Christ, and the person upstage isn't the one that has all the answers. So I appreciate you guys sharing with me about what you learned in this series. And I think it's been a really cool journey for all of us to go on. And so, yeah, I think for me, that's been the biggest thing to carry with continuing with deconstruction and just remembering as we journey with Jesus is like, what is, not good that we're doing that we could get rid of, what, is good or good intentions, and where do we go from here? So just kind of learning with that. So I think we're going to do communion now. Melissa and I are going to do communion because we're going to try to get Sean to sit down as much as he can. Pray for me for that. He's excellent at caring for others. He's a terrible patient.